Taylor, just as a note, looks like we lost Lucy there, but the drug laws are a result of that automatic sentencing. We have people, all their crime was is that they were smoking a little weed at a party, and now they're in jail for 20 years because of how much weed they had. I find that ludicrous, and I find it ridiculous. If somebody wants to do that, it's like being arrested for having a beer at a party and spending 20 years in jail. It just doesn't make any sense. And so I feel like there are worse crimes. There are true crimes that really do hurt people that we should be focusing on. And I don't feel like the war on drugs is where where our resources should be placed. And we have a limited amount of resources, and I don't feel that's a good use of our resources, but it's a political game, and it's a political move. And if we don't change that, then you're going to have problems. And it comes back to that war on drugs. So the question is, how do you change some of what we have here? I think you have to start with the war on drugs and then move from there. With regards to what Stefan and Lucy were should we say, discussing.
Going back and forth about.
Going back and forth, yeah. When you have police pull you over, I think that it's just good standard behavior to be compliant with the police. If you're going to be belligerent or you're going to run, the cops are going to they're going to bring a beating. But if you're compliant, if you're helpful, if you're nice, they tend to be nice back, and you can actually have a decent conversation with them. I'm not saying that that's the way it always has to be. Now, are there bad cops? Absolutely. And I'm going to tell you straight up, the most corrupt people in the world are not politicians. And this is from my experience as a police officer. The most corrupt people that I saw in the military were police, because they had the badge and they had the power and they had the ability to hide what they were doing. And it shocked me. I was young and naive, and I had to sober up pretty quick. So that needs to be dealt with. And part of it is that if we don't give our police political backing, then they're not going to take down their own. They're going to feel that thin blue line is going to come crumbling down if they go after their own. And they won't when everybody else is going after them, all of them. That's why they stand. That's why you have Blasio having such problems, because he doesn't give the police department the political backing that it needs, and at the same time ask them to strenuously police their own. And because of that, you have the problems that you have today.
All right, Peter, I'm going to interrupt you for just a second. We're going to take a 30-second break. We'll be right back. This is Saturday Night Cigar Lounge here on Vigilant Liberty Radio. George, I haven't forgotten you. I'll let you talk in just a minute. Be right back.
This is Ed Morrissey of HotAir.com, and you're listening to Vigilant Liberty Radio.
And of course,
back here on Saturday Night Cigar Lounge here on Vigilant Liberty Radio. I'm your host, Taylor Millard. We have everyone here: Lucy Steigerwald, George Templeton, Stefan Glaug, and Peter Ream. Thank you guys very much for being here. George, you had 2 points that you wanted to make. One of the things that Peter said, and Peter, if I'm wrong here, feel free to correct me, which is, one, there's nothing wrong with being respectful to police officers, but they need to be respectful to you as well. Two, there needs to be reform, especially on the sentencing basis, and the war on drugs needs to end. And three, some of the most corrupt people you've ever met were police officers. Correct?
That is correct.
All right. George, you had 2 points you wanted to make. Go right ahead.
Well, the thing about ending the war on drugs, I think decriminalizing marijuana is something that I can get along with. I'm interested to see what's going to happen in these states where it is legalized, if the societal damage, if there is any, outweighs the tax money that comes in. But I think when it comes to hard drugs, and I'm talking about meth and ecstasy and coke and crack and also the things like OxyContin that get shopped around. I think we've got to keep fighting on those fronts because those things. I mean, weed has got its issues, but weed is much less harmless than those other things. Those other things are really bad. They're really pernicious, and I think if you stop the war on drugs with those, I think there's a lot of trouble that can be had and a lot of societal damage that can be done. But I want to agree with Peter Ream and add and amplify, if I can, his point about the thin blue line. The internal affairs has got to be beefed up. It has to be beefed up. There has to be more power and force put behind it because these things where you have these bad cops doing bad things and getting away with it. And in Los Angeles, it was the worst example. I mean, you had the most corrupt cops in the country back in the 90s were in the LAPD, and they were doing terrible things, and they almost operated as a mafia. And that kind of stuff, it undermines everything. So for that's where I agree with Peter Ream wholeheartedly, is that the thin blue line, that we can't have that anymore. The cops have to if they have to be forced to, they have to police themselves, or they have to be policed, because you see the lack of trust throughout the communities. That is the underlying thing that I think builds such a negative reaction when you have something like the Garner situation and the Michael Brown situation. And if we didn't have that, if cops were being investigated and then when they were doing wrong, they were being prosecuted for it and punished for it, I think there would be less of that mistrust between the police and the people.
All right, so you say only in the pot. War on drugs. Peter, I think you're in favor of completely ending it, right?
Yeah, at first I wasn't, and I have to also say that when I was in high school, I fully backed it. I thought that all drugs should be illegal and there should be high punishment. But after both having been in law enforcement as well as having seen the societal effects, and quite frankly, the thing that really changed my mind for complete decriminalization across the board is what happened in Portugal 12 years ago. And we have 12 years of history. Portugal eliminated criminal penalties for drug use, and so those caught with small amounts of marijuana, cocaine, and heroin go unindicted, and possession is a misdemeanor on par with illegal parking. All of the police and all of society, basically, the conservative part of society, said that it would just be a terrible thing and society would go down the drain. Not so. Portugal actually has had, they have seen fewer criminals as a result, obviously because you're not indicting people for those reasons. So they have fewer people in prisons. They don't have the societal collapse that was predicted. They also actually have fewer drug addicts than they did before. So you actually have seen drug addiction drop as a result of this, which was surprising. People actually predicted it would go up. It did the reverse and went down. The police force, they've actually are very supportive of the policy now because of the results of it. And you don't have you don't have the problems that they had before. So I understand the problems that you could have that George is saying. George is saying that, look, these drugs are pernicious, they're awful, what they do to people is awful. I contend that you're going to have the same thing with alcohol. It really doesn't depend on the source of it. It depends on the person. And if you can change people's hearts, you can pull them out of that. But
Lucy's chomping at the bit.
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
So go ahead, Lucy.
Well, I mean, obviously, the whole reforming internal affairs and beefing them up thing, I do agree with, so that is a good point. The thing with the hard drugs being different is we already have hard drugs and hard drug addiction. How could it, I mean, Portugal is a great example of something to look at to see that it's done well, but how could it be worse? I mean, no one's saying crack is awesome, but we can say the prohibition and the violence brewing policies combined with crack being still there because the government is incompetent, as we well know. I mean, everything bad about drug addiction and drug use is still here. We just have the absolute debacle of prohibition on top of that. And, getting rid of one horrible thing will free us up to look at, okay, you need serious help with this drug addiction, and that is a health problem, and hopefully we could, whatever civil institutions can help you out with that problem you have, we should help out with that. I mean, how could it possibly be worse to legalize hard drugs? Not to mention, even hard drugs are not the same. Ecstasy, I know that people have looked at its usage for therapies and for, soldiers with PTSD, and they've barely been able to look at this kind of thing because it's, so heavily restricted. But there's, even among hard drugs, it's not like this one solid substance. There's a lot of range there. And on a more personal note, I have plenty of loved ones who need serious opiates because they have chronic pain problems, and I don't really think a bunch of morons at the DEA have any business deciding how much painkillers, my loved ones can have, or more to the point, blackmailing doctors is not, prescribing enough painkillers. It's not. Law and Order has done nothing to fix this. It has simply made a new problem on top of another one.
Stefan?
As far as drugs and drugs in your house, I could care less what you do in your house. But if you bring it on the street, bring it into a car, and it affects the way I live, like i.e. a crash, or I'm in a drugstore and you decide to rob it because you need something like that, that's the only kind of stuff that I disagree with, the hard stuff. And I know that's few and far between with some of that stuff that happens like that. But it's, I think drugs would be better off if they, the only way they get prison sentences is if they carry a gun on them at the time of it. Because some of the stuff is really violent, the way they, trade, the way they ship them and all sorts of stuff. So there's some things that...
People have also been screwed over, because they had a legal gun on them, or they owned a legal gun while selling a little bit of drugs non-violently. There's some seriously heavy mandatory minimums that come into play when you have a gun, even a legal one. It doesn't matter anymore. Like, we were already overly punishing people. Actually, violent people should be punished for being violent, not because they own a gun or because they sold a substance. It's not the same thing. And we've been pretending it's the same thing for 40 years now, and we've caused a whole lot of human misery, and I'm getting kind of tired of it.
All right, George, I do want to give... Yeah, go ahead, George.
And I understand Lucy's point about the opiates and barbiturates, but that's got to be tightly controlled. Living in Virginia and watching the state have to deal with just massive amounts of people hooked on OxyContin and selling it and doctor shopping. I mean, when they call it hillbilly heroin, they're not kidding. That is a Schedule II drug. It's really powerful. And yes, people that have pain need it, but there are so many people that abuse it. You can get hooked on OxyContin, Vicodin, these kinds of things. To me, that's got to be policed, because those are drugs that, yes, they can help people, but those are drugs that are so easily abused, and people can get hooked on them, and it's awful what it does to you. That's what doctors are for. Doctors should be telling people, listen, I know you have pain, but this substance is incredibly addictive. Maybe we can find you something less addictive that might work. I mean, what is law and order? Why should law and order and in that kind of institutions have any place at all in this kind of unfortunate side effect? Because
addiction
there are
is
people
bad.
that abuse it. There are people that abuse it. There are people that...
There are people who are on drugs who have a problem that is drug addiction. What does that have to do with police? Why should police have anything to do with that?
Because they will commit crimes to feed that habit. They will do that. I mean, and I think... restricting the supply of it makes the substance more expensive, thereby mandating that a horrible addict is going to need to do something desperate to get their supply. If there's cheap stuff available, yeah, it sucks that they're addicted, but maybe they're not knocking over a store about it.
If I may, George, to address your point about these people get addicted to it, I'm going to contend also that a lot of people have very strong addictions to alcohol, and that it's regulated. So I would contend the substance really isn't that important because I have seen that